Hey there, Mama, and welcome back to the Mom's Overcoming Overwhelm podcast, episode number 248. I'm Emily McDermott, and I'm here beside you on this journey as we work together to declutter your home, head, and heart. This summer, I'm bringing you some of my favorite interviews that I have done on other people's podcasts, and today I'm bringing you my interview on paring down with Shannon Lako. It's a wonderful podcast. Shannon is like talking to your BFF. She's amazing. So make sure to check out her podcast. And we are talking about one of my favorite topics, Swedish death cleaning. So I have spoken about it on the podcast before, but we really go more in depth and she asks some really insightful questions. So you don't need to do Swedish death cleaning when you're in your 60s or later. You can really do it now. And we talk about what it is, why sometimes it's difficult for us to focus on thinking about our death and our passing, and why that's definitely not an American point of view, and also just kind of looking at the crux of Swedish death cleaning, which I think is alleviating burden on our loved ones by allowing them to understand what we would want done with our stuff and taking care of as much as we can before we pass. So I hope that you enjoy this conversation with Shannon Lako. Hey Mama, are you tired of your cluttered home and mile-long to-do lists but are too overwhelmed to know where to start? Do you lack the time and motivation and don't think you'll ever conquer the clutter? You're in the right place. I'm Emily, wife, boy mom, and declutter coach who has overcome the overwhelm in my own life through decluttering and simplifying. I believe every mom deserves the peace that comes from a clutter-free home. Ready to get your life back? Let's declutter your home, head, and heart together.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Paring Down. Today's episode is all about Swedish death cleaning. Dun, dun, dun. Now, really what Swedish death cleaning is, which Emily, our guest, is going to share more about, is decluttering so that when you die, no one else has to. We all have loved ones and we don't want to do that to them. And so it's a really good way to be motivated in decluttering. But this is not a Debbie Downer episode at all. I think you're going to find it to be upbeat and really practical. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest, Emily McDermott. Emily hosts her weekly podcast, Mom's Overcoming Overwhelm, where she helps moms declutter their homes, heads, and hearts. She also offers in-person decluttering and organizing services in Northern Virginia. And this part I think is so cool. She offers custom poem writing services. Over the course of the last 10 years, Emily has removed the excess from her life to focus on what is most important to her. And I know that's your goal too. So please enjoy this episode with Emily McDermott. Yay, Emily. I'm so happy to have you here. Thanks for coming on my show today.
I know. We had such a fun time on my show and I am excited. And the funny thing is I get excited about talking a lot of things, but death cleaning, I mean, come on, super fun, right?
It's not morbid at all. Actually, it's not. And we will get into that today. But for those of my listeners who may not be familiar with you, I did kind of give them a brief overview in your introduction. But would you give everyone a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I'm a wife. I'm a mom of two boys that are 8 and 9, and they're lots of fun. And I do in-home decluttering and organizing and also have a podcast. And I love both of those things. I love the really hands-on. I was working with an 87-year-old couple and their daughter yesterday as they're trying to age in place. I work with moms with like super young kids that are just trying to like excavate their playroom. It's like everything all in between. And then the podcast, we get to talk to amazing people, right? So it's just a really fun time. And I live in Northern Virginia, maybe moving in the future soon here, kind of similar to you, things up in the air. So just very grateful for where I am right now. And then also the opportunity to talk about things like this, about really letting go of what is not serving us so we can embrace these new seasons in our life.
I love that you're in the houses. I think that is so special because I am not. Like, I love to talk about it, and I will offer my friends advice where I can, but I think it gives you a really special kind of insight. And also, side note, I know I didn't say this to you before we got started, but we found out yesterday that we are 100% moving to Finland. So everybody, we are moving to Finland this summer. It's crazy. So if I seem like a little bit distracted this morning, it's also just that my brain is, mid explosion currently. So anywho, where might you guys be going?
Probably back to Pittsburgh area where my husband and I are both from. So even though we were a military family, we never had to move. We were permanently stationed here. But speaking of, death cleaning and not burdening your loved ones and that kind of thing, just being able to live closer to our parents, and they've downsized, but just kind of helping them in this sort of like later season of life is something that is really important to us. And interesting that you'll be Sweden adjacent in Finland.
I know,
so that's cool, right?
Exactly. With the whole topic for today. And for listeners who've never heard the term before, what is Swedish death cleaning?
Yeah, it's interesting that the term seems very stark. It's like death cleaning,
Yes.
But really it's just, being able to go through your things so your loved ones are not burdened with it after you die. And I guess that it is something very common. The idea is very common in Sweden, but not very much so, I would say, in the United States, where we kind of shy away from these conversations about death. So it's really kind of, doing this kind of clearing, but with the intention of not burdening your loved ones, which is really, I think, how it's different than just your normal, like, decluttering that you would normally do on a weekend or something.
Right. The motivation is really deep. Now, before we get into kind of some of those deeper involvements, why is Swedish death cleaning still applicable for those of us who aren't necessarily reaching that age where, who knows when it's going to happen to any of us, but, that age where you start considering the fact that you are in the last third of your life? How does this still apply to those of us a bit younger?
Yeah, so I read the book a little bit after it came out. So I think it came out 2017 in Sweden, 2018 in the United States. I read it in 2019. And at the time I was—
Are you talking about Margarita's book?
Yes,
okay, yes, no, that's such a good one. Yeah, it's such a good one.
Yeah, so The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning is kind of what put this on the map for people a little bit more than just in Sweden. And I love the name of it because it's saying gentle. And so gentle doesn't seem to go with death cleaning. It's kind of an interesting juxtaposition of words. But I read it at the age of 39 when I was in perfectly good health. And I decided I wanted to do my own version. And the reason was, if I were to pass away for any reason, just whatever the reason might be, I didn't want to burden my husband and my kids with not only having to go through my stuff, but wondering what I wanted done with my stuff. Because it's one thing to have to go through items and just the sheer volume of that and the time and the energy. And you're also having people grieving at the time, when that's the really different part than just your normal decluttering, is that you're preventing people that are grieving your loss from having to do this. But I also, and we can talk about it, kind of like want a step further. And I was more looking at, okay, what do I want my burial wishes to be? What do I want my funeral wishes? Where specifically do I want things to go? Like what people, what organizations? And then also writing my own eulogy. Like I kind of took it a step further, but it really was imagining I died and my husband and kids are having to go through my stuff while they're crying and grieving. And I don't want that. I don't want that for them. So I'm wanting to do what I can now, even though it's not something you would normally think about in your 30s or 40s or whatever, if you're in perfectly good health.
Right. I can't help but think of my mom and how grateful I am that even though, she never did Swedish death cleaning before she passed away at the age of 54. But she made it so clear to me throughout my life that stuff wasn't important to her, that like physical possessions were not an important piece of her life, that certainly gave me so much more freedom as I let go of her things, knowing she would want me to, like that she would be so annoyed if I kept more than I needed. And that those things don't represent her. And so I appreciate that kind of broader sense too, that we can share with our families in terms of our values, but this really practical application of going through our stuff. And like you said, it can go really far into organizing documents, all of that. And I have a couple questions about that too. It was interesting as I was listening to you explain it all. It can be uncomfortable, right? It's a very, in Western culture, taboo to think about death, and especially to talk about death. So, what does Swedish death cleaning say about our relationship to mortality and this topic of death?
Yeah, just that, especially in the Western world, that we do shy away from the conversations. And even if somebody is diagnosed with an illness, it is, at least in my experience, like, oh, we have to stay positive and, we can't talk about these eventualities and everything. But the point is that we need to be able to really think, like you said, about the logistical considerations. And there's one quote in the book. There's lots of great quotes, but there's one that really hits home for me, if you don't mind me sharing.
Please.
Do not ever imagine that anyone will wish or be able to schedule time off to take care of what you didn't bother to take care of yourself. No matter how much they love you, don't leave this burden to them. And so you have Margarita Magnuson. She's this cute woman. She says she's like between 80 and 100. She's like kind of coy. She's like, I consider this my responsibility to tell people about this because I've had to clean out loved ones' homes, and I feel like this is really important. But she doesn't pull any punches. She's like, don't assume people are going to deal with all of your crap that you don't want to deal with right now, because it is I guess it's kind of our MO, especially in the United States, to kind of like, oh, we're so distracted. I'll do it later. Like, I'll figure this out later. And the distraction keeps us from that discomfort. And so we numb in these different ways of, maybe we're on our phones or we're doing these different things. And it isn't like, I should take care of this now. I should make sure I take care of what other people shouldn't have to. And I don't know. I just really love the Swedish approach, and in other cultures where death is really embraced as part of the daily experience, instead of something that we just don't think about and don't talk about until someone passes and we have to figure out their funeral arrangements. Like, it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah, that's the point right there, is that we think that thinking about death is going to make us just feel sad and depressed all the time. But there's actually been research on this. I'm like Googling as we are right here. There's like an entire article on Psychology Today. You guys can all Google it too. I didn't like do my homework ahead of time because this just came to mind as Emily was talking. But there is research that contemplating death and talking about it openly and not letting it be taboo improves our quality of life, because it, first of all, fosters our appreciation, right? We all know that phrase, live like you're dying, but that requires the thought of dying. That requires recognizing our mortality. It reduces fear. We think thinking about something will make us feel more fearful, when in reality, not thinking about it allows that anxiety to grow. But when we face it head on, it actually becomes a lot easier to manage. And so it's just helping us prioritize what's important in life. And so I hope that everyone listening knows that this conversation today isn't about, oh, let's think about the drudgery of death. It's actually hopefully helpful, and it can be a really positive thing, and it can help us celebrate our lives while we're alive better, and can help us celebrate the lives of loved ones when they're gone better, and they can celebrate us better. So I just wanted to go on that tangent for a second, just because I know it's just so uncommon to talk about in our culture.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add is that if you are married or in a relationship, it really is an interesting topic of conversation to have with your significant other. So when you get married, you're picking out china patterns, you're figuring out what bedding you want, all these different things. You're not like, oh, do you want to be buried or cremated? And my husband and I had never had that conversation. Turns out he wanted to be cremated. I thought we were being buried. And I'm like, oh, interesting. Okay. Well, I guess we're both being cremated then. I know that sounds kind of like silly, but it's one of these things like, I just want to make sure he doesn't have to ever ask the question, what would she have wanted? And it's something that in a marriage can really strengthen that relationship because you have peace around that. That if something were to happen, like I am grieving, but I don't have to be like, I don't know what to do. I have to raise these kids. I don't even know where our paperwork is. I don't know what he would have wanted for his funeral. Like all of these questions, I don't really have those. And just to have that peace in my day to day living is such a gift, but it's not something, like you said, that people are talking about. Or you're not going on your first date being like, hey, do you want to be buried or cremated? Like no one has those conversations, right?
Have you seen those? I've seen them like on Etsy, funny enough, that people make these binders, specifically like death binders, and they have all your wishes laid out, all of your passwords, all of your bank accounts, all of your everything you can imagine, your Instagram password. And it's just like, open me when I die kind of a thing, you know? And I was like, gosh, that's like really good organization. And I wish that I'd had that when my mom passed away, because there are so many things. Do you want open casket, closed casket? I remember that was a conversation, and you really got to think about what the person would want, not just all the different opinions at hand. But it's like, gosh, it would just be so easier if she could tell us instead of us having to come to these different conclusions, with different emotions involved. So I just want to throw that out there. If you want to look up on Etsy, the death binders, have you heard of those?
Yeah, and my dad, he's so funny. He's 80 and like he could be a little bit more organized. So if I do move back to the area, I'm going to make that a priority. But he's like, you just have to go to the wig file, the when I'm gone file. That's all you have to do. It'll tell you everything. My mom's like, it does not tell us everything.
At least he tried.
I know, at least he tried. But yeah, there are a lot of tools out there. So definitely use them. Have that be, maybe a very unorthodox Christmas gift or something like, hey, mom and dad, I got you this filing thing so that I actually know what your passwords are and bank accounts and that kind of thing. It is super helpful.
So helpful. And one last tangent before I get to your next question, official question, is have you heard of Storyworth?
Yes, and I have done that. Okay, I'm still when we talk about photos, I'll talk about this project, but
hey guys, it's time for your ad break. Each week I like to say a huge thank you for your graciousness that these are part of the podcast. Here we go.
Have you heard of Storyworth?
When we talk about photos, I'll talk about this project, but I did all of the back and forth with both my parents for the actual stories. So now I'm just finishing it with the photos and then I'm going to get the books done. But it was such an amazing process of just being able to ask kind of whatever questions I wanted, but to ask both of them the same questions and kind of get the different answers from my parents. So yes, I would highly recommend that as a gift.
So they sponsor this podcast, or they sponsored a couple episodes ago. And so they gave me like a free book to give to a family member. And so I'm doing it with my dad right now. And so every Monday he answers a question. It is my favorite part of every Monday. And just so people know, this episode is not sponsored by Storyworth. I just genuinely like them, but I still do have a code in my, in the show notes. I'll have it in there. I think it should still work. But, yeah, like you get to ask these questions about their lives, and at the end of the year they put it all in a book for you, and you can add photos or you don't have to, and it's a way to preserve their values and their memories. And so as we're thinking about preserving their life while respecting their stuff, I bring that up because there are definitely options and ways to preserve their life and the memory of who they are without holding on to every last item. So an option like Storyworth, this company that puts it together for you, is really, really cool. But let's back up a little bit here. Let's talk about the families that are left behind, because that is such a huge motivation when we're talking about Swedish death cleaning. So when families are left to sort through someone's belongings after an unexpected death specifically, but really any death at all, what emotional and logistical challenges have you personally seen them face, since I know that you're in the home with them? And how does that affect even the relationship that the people left behind feel towards the person who passed away?
Yeah, I've had some experience working with widows, and I had one person that they really wanted to put a yard sale on for her husband's clothing specifically. And in retrospect, I probably would have guided her not to do that. But she was equating the clothing with his memory and also the worth I think, of him and thought that she was going to be able to get money for it. She didn't feel right just being able to let go of the clothing, because that to her was that his memory wasn't worth anything. And it's really tough, especially as a decluttering educator, to be able, and you're in that position and you're like, okay, it's hard to tell her, like, you're not going to get any money for any of this clothing, but that doesn't mean that your husband's memory wasn't worth something. So that was one experience that was challenging. I think besides the taking off time from work, like we talked about, the grieving, the equating stuff with memory and also with identity and worth as a person, that there's also some of these family dynamics that you don't know about until somebody passes, especially when you have children or siblings. And then, there's certain things that some people feel very strongly about, but maybe they're not the ones that are going through the home and having to do all the work. And you have one person that's just like, this is super uncomfortable, I just want all the stuff gone. And somebody else wants to keep every little thing. So I've also seen that kind of in my extended family with the death of my grandparents kind of play out in that way. And it's really hard. So it's just so much easier, as much as you can do on the front end, so that we're not having to have, because it's an emotional roller coaster. And I'm sure with your experience with your mom that there was some of that, even though she had done some of the legwork at the beginning.
Right. I think that's such an important motivating factor, is when we're alive, how do we help protect the relationships of the people we leave behind? Because not only might they feel resentment towards us for making them go through their stuff. I've seen that when people share with me in DMs, that it almost puts casts a shadow over the person who died, because people are almost mad. Like, why did you leave all this for me to deal with? Right. So not only are we preserving the legacy of that relationship with us ourselves, but like you're talking about, there's so many familial dynamics at play. And if we can just take care of it ourselves, not just with like writing out what matters and what doesn't, which is important, but it's also just protecting people from the natural inclination as human beings to feel selfish in our grief, and siblings fighting over stuff that maybe their parent wouldn't even care about. Why don't we get rid of the things that we certainly do not care about, so that we save the drama of someone thinking, oh, I want mom's old purse. No, I want mom's old purse. And mom, dead, is like, I didn't even want that old purse. You know what I mean? Like, let's get rid of it ourselves to save that drama and those relationships the best that we can. Speaking of sentimental items, things can be sentimental to us, and things can be sentimental to other people. Those are two different things. We know this with kid artwork. It's sentimental to the parents. The kids do not care about it once they're adults. They're 30 years old. They don't want their kindergartner, crafts, but we do as the parent. So how can we manage that emotional side of letting go of sentimental items that represent this life that we've lived?
Yeah, well, one of the recommendations in the book, and I think it's either called the When I Die or Just for Me box. There's a couple different terms for it, but it is a highly curated, sentimental, like memory box, but just for the things that are important to you and nobody else, with the disclaimer that if I die, you have full permission to just throw it away. It's okay. So I have one. I keep it in my nightstand table, and it has a novel I wrote. You'll appreciate this with your writing. A novel I wrote on notebook paper that was like over 100 pages when I was in 5th grade, and back and front in my handwriting. And I also was on the high school like newspaper and stuff. And so I had some of these articles that I wrote for the newspaper. I don't need my kids to keep any of this stuff, or maybe like an article of announcing our engagement, like a couple of those things that I've kept. And so it's just kind of like showing aspects of my life that represent me, who I was, but we're not having our family members have to decide about whether it's important, and we're giving them that permission slip to let it go. But it is highly personal, highly curated, but it's it's cute. It's like exciting. It's fun. It's like, oh, I can look at my like just for me box whenever I want and just remember some of these things. But it is this small contained thing. So it's not like every single thing my kids ever drew or every single thing that I ever did. And it's having that curation mindset that makes it even more special.
I love that. Yeah, that 9 o'clock in the morning here.
It's okay.
I got that frog voice. Yeah, that stood out to me in Margarita's book too, because I think it's just such sound advice. We think that sentimentality needs to last forever or is for everyone involved. And there's some humility in saying, this doesn't have to matter to everyone else as much as it matters to me. But there's also some confidence in saying, but this does matter to me. I think it's a beautiful balance to keep that box while saying, making it clear that nobody else needs to keep it. Now, what are some sentimental item type things that you would recommend maybe passing down as heirlooms? Let's talk about passing things down that do matter to you and do have sentimental value. How can we go about that responsibly?
Yeah. So part of it is just in your everyday life, being able to share stories of what is important and why with your loved ones. So for me, we have a piano, and it is the piano that my dad gave my mom as a wedding present. It's the one that I learned to play on that we have in our house. I want my kids to know that. Not necessarily that they have to keep the piano, but knowing kind of the significance of it. And one of the other ways to do it, which my aunt and uncle, who actually don't have kids, they've started doing this because they host Thanksgiving at their house. They actually have like a sign up sheet of like different things within their home. And they, at that time, you're already with family, you're talking about family type of things. And you can say, oh, well, this credenza belonged to your great Aunt Mary, and she used to write letters on, and then they actually have a sign up sheet for who would maybe be interested in these pieces if they were to pass because they're in their 70s. And it's just a really cool idea because you're with your family anyway. You're sharing these memories. It can be light and happy. It doesn't have to be like so like serious, but it is a way to really intentionally share the stories of these heirlooms and then proactively make a plan for what's going to happen when you pass. And then if you and your cousin are both interested in the same thing, you can have a conversation about it and be like, oh, well, that's fine. You could have that at your house because, you live down the street from me and I'll see you all the time. You can start having these conversations now rather than leaving it for after the person passes. So I just thought that was really brilliant.
I'm obsessed with this idea of a sign-up sheet. It's so good. And like you said, if we do it now when we are all alive, people are not in the midst of their grief, which, like I said, our natural inclination as human beings is to be selfish in our grief. And we can actually have conversations that are human based and not just grief based, and saying, of course, like, oh yeah, I'll come see you. And that'll be a fun time for me to remember that memory when I go to your house, right? You can do that in a way that feels so much healthier and happier. And like you said, the stories are shared. Gosh, like we but we chose to leave behind in Florida when we moved here to Alaska last year, this beautiful old antique bar that I grew up with in my house, because I knew we didn't really have room for it here. And so I had to think, well, is this something that I want in my forever home someday? God willing, we get to actually settle down somewhere. And, I'm willing to hold on to some things as a military spouse for that, because it's a different lifestyle when you're changing houses every couple of years. But I was like, I told my husband, this isn't worth it to me if it's just my memory of seeing it in my living room or in the dining room I grew up in. Where does it come from? So I had texted my stepdad before he passed away. Do you know where this came from? Because it was in my house, before he married my mom. He said, no, I don't, it must have been someone on your mom's side. I asked my dad, because they were married for 14 years. Dad, do you remember this? And he doesn't really know. So I texted my aunt, my mom's sister. Do you know where this? She's like, I think that it might be. No one knows the story of it. And so I said, I don't. I'm sure that it has a good story, but if I don't know it, what's the point, really? Like, how does this really feed into a sentimental moment for our family, and so it is so important to share those stories because they get lost so easily, or even write them down next to a picture. As I make my family yearbooks, I try and make note of even some of the things in the background of what that is in case that interests people. But thank you for bringing that point up. I think that's huge. Is there a particular room or category of items you recommend starting with specifically when you're coming at stuff from the perspective of Swedish death cleaning?
Yeah, and I kind of looked at my notes again from the book just to make sure I remembered. And Margarita, she does recommend kind of the bigger things first. So not starting with the photographs, not starting with the documents, but doing more of like clothing, furniture, some of those heirlooms. I would maybe put books into that category. And so really having that mentality, not only like that kind of sign up sheet mentality perhaps, but also one of the things I recommend is having, and I have it in a Google sheet, like categories of clothing and the organizations where I would want them to go if I don't want it to go to specific people. So for example, for my clothing, I would want it to go to a particular women's shelter. For the books, I want them to go to our public library. And that again takes out the guesswork. So you start kind of with that, the broader categories. And then of course, with photographs and documents, that's when you're really in the weeds because it is such kind of like a dense, time consuming project. And you want to leave that to the end so that you can actually see some of that progress that you're making in the other areas.
Well, and that kind of brings up a good point here. The whole point of this isn't just organization and communication, though those things are very important. It's the act of paring down, of decluttering this stuff so that it isn't as overwhelming, not only for your family when you're gone, but for you in life too. So, I'm curious, let's talk about clothes. That's a great example. We can communicate where we want our clothes to go, but then how is it also beneficial to simply have fewer clothes, especially, from the perspective of Swedish death cleaning?
Yeah. And that goes back to having people have to go through everything. But with clothing, I'm going to add something to that, which is
Another quick word from our amazing sponsors. Thank you to you and them for supporting this show. Here we go. My husband is really prone to sneezing fits, and I tend to get headaches, especially when stressed. So in the last year or two, we have really tried to figure out how to create the healthiest environment inside of our home. And a little over a year ago, we got ourselves an air doctor. It is the only air purifier we use inside of our home, and I cannot begin to express to you the world of difference it has made. It has reduced my husband's allergy symptoms, gives me so much peace of mind when it comes to my children's health, and I can just feel the lightness. The smells are different inside of our house. It's really amazing because all of the chemicals, when you're cooking, those go into the air, and it captures these airborne contaminants that you just don't want to be breathing in, like dust, pollen, mold spores, pet dander, wildfire smoke, bacteria, viruses, odors, ozone, and more. Head to airdoctorpro.com and use promo code PAIRING, that's PARING, remember there's no I in pair, to get up to $300 off today. Air Doctor comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee, plus a 3-year warranty, an $84 value for free. Get this exclusive podcast-only offer now at airdoctorpro.com, AIRDOCTORPRO.com. Use promo code PAIRING.
But with clothing, I'm going to add something to that, which is if you are a person that has a lot of things that have tags on it, okay, that you've never worn before. And so I know one of my clients, her aunt passed away, and it was mostly brand new things with the tags still on it. And so then you have the question, do I need to sell this? Do I need to try to recoup some of the value of it? Whereas if you had gone through that already and been like, okay, this has been in my closet for years with the tags on, I've never worn it, so I'm going to, sell it or donate it or whatever. And just keeping what you're actually wearing your day to day, that makes it so much easier. But yeah, I feel like more than other categories, clothing is where we're more likely to have things that have the tags on it or has never been worn. And that's really not fair to your family members to have to go through that.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think also about basements and storage units. I think one of the challenging parts with those is that we feel like we don't know where to start. I mean, I did an episode about decluttering storage units, and, it's a big project, but if it's overwhelming to us, it would also be overwhelming to the people we leave behind, even more so because they don't have like the stories behind everything to know what they should and shouldn't keep and your blessing and all of that. So, how would you suggest approaching, especially if someone is in their last third of life where physically it's hard for them to declutter? How do they go about this in a way that feels manageable, that they can actually do physically? Like, any advice on that?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's the having the conversation. So being able to speak to your loved ones about the things that are important to you and why. And then when you have kind of focused on the things that you're wanting to keep or wanting to pass on, then I would highly recommend hiring a third party, or if you have your kids live close or something, kind of have them help with the actual like going through the excess, because there is sometimes that you don't have as much energy, you don't have as much mobility, having to move boxes and whatever. And for example, I was with this 87-year-old couple yesterday, and she had fallen because she can't get her walker like through her house. So we need to make sure that we're focusing on functionality and accessibility, and then being able to bring other people in that can help. And then you're maybe just kind of sitting there and then going like reviewing the actual items, but not having to do the physical heavy lifting, because that can really be a lot.
Yeah, that's great advice. As you were talking, though, you said being able to identify what truly matters to you, or being kind of the one to direct what stays and what goes. What do we do if we know logically that we think too much is important? Like, we don't want to let things go. Like, this feels really important. And you're like, no, but that's really important. And that's really important. And that's the challenge with decluttering, especially when we're looking at these items that represent an entire life. What advice would you give to people who really struggle with paring down their sentimental items or the things that they feel are really important to keep?
Yeah. So we know generationally, like my dad is a boomer, I am on the cusp of millennial, and then my kids are whatever they are. I don't know. But from generation to generation, it is a lot less likely that we're going to want any of our parents' stuff that they have. So one of the kind of hard conversations that might kind of get you out of the I want to keep everything is important mentality is to actually have a conversation, potentially with your children, depending on their age, or, with your siblings or loved ones, and be like, okay, if I were to pass, would you want like any of this? And you might be surprised by their answer. They might be interested in something that you had no clue that they would ever want, or you might realize that they're not really interested in any of it. And then it's kind of the light bulb moment. It's like, oh, okay, well, I thought all of this was super important, but if it's only important to me, why am I keeping it all? Like, is there any more of that filtering that I can do as far as like the importance? Like, if I give this advice when people are working through sentimental items, do you need the physical item? Like, do you need to touch and feel and experience tactically like what this item is? Is it okay just to have the story? Is it okay to just have the photo? Like, is that enough? And maybe the decision we're making is, if the photo and the story is enough, we let some of those things go, and we're just keeping the things that actually matter to us, having the physical item, but we've thought about it. Like, we've kind of made that decision. So I think conversations with our loved ones, and then really kind of doing an additional sort of questioning and filtering test, might help us pare down a little bit more when it comes to those things.
Well, I'm going to ask you a super deep question, and I know that no one can solve every single psychological dilemma of human nature, but I'm going to ask you anyway. So do your best here. I'm kidding. But how do we wrestle with ourselves. I hate to put it like that, but like, what do we do about this natural defensiveness that might come up where we are offended that other people might not want our stuff? Like, what kind of self-work does that involve?
Yeah. And I see this with my clients more so when it comes to what their perceived worth of something is, like potentially in the marketplace. Like they think, I read about it, can't remember which book this was now, but it was called the Antiques Roadshow mentality, where you think that you have this old thing and it's worth a lot of money, but actually it's not worth that much money, right? And so we have to kind of separate our identity from the item because it feels very intertwined. It feels like, for example, like my wedding ring or something. Like this is part of me. Like it's always with me. You know, I don't take it off. Like it's part of who I am. But really, it's not. Like it's separate from me. And if something were to happen to said wedding ring, what it represents is still true, that I'm still married, that I still have this, you know, loving relationship with my husband. And we have to do some of that difficult inner work to know that that separation is there, but then also not to be so sensitive or be offended when people don't attribute the same importance and meaning to something that we do. And it's not meant as a personal, like affront to us in any way. It's just that they haven't had the interaction and the memory and all of the things that make it what it is to you. They haven't had that experience, and that's okay. But we don't have to feel this like judgment or anything, just like we wouldn't judge someone for thinking that someone is important. I mean, when I'm working in home, unless something is like really, really trash, like really, really trash, I ask. I always ask because it's not necessarily trash to that person. And I have to respect that because I'm coming from a completely different perspective. So yeah, that's my attempt to solve that larger psychological
You did a great
dilemma.
job. Honestly, I think you might have solved it. That was really impressive. Okay, well, before we wrap up, last major question here. I do want to touch on photographs because I think, especially with Swedish death cleaning, we're looking back on our lives. And especially in this day and age, this is a topic that 100 years ago didn't exist. 50 years ago didn't exist nearly to this extent because we have so many options for taking photographs these days. And so we just have more and more and more. And then we have our generation as millennials, our grandparents, and maybe our great-grandparents are really the first people that there's even any photographs of their life. So it's been passed down to us. And now our lives come with thousands of photographs. Just imagine how this is going to compound, for our grandchildren. It's crazy if you think about it. So what is your suggestion for how we approach paring down our photos and choosing which ones are worth keeping?
So I mentioned Storyworth. Okay. So I did Storyworth for my parents. And now I'm like, oh, I'd like to put some photos, with these. Can I have the photos? And my mom's like, sure. And she gives me this huge bin of photos with all the photos from my dad's life and her life and our lives, pretty much from 1945. Okay. So it was a project. It was an important project, but some of the things that I used to organize and go through were, do I know who these people are? And if not, talking to my parents, making sure that they know who they are and that there's a kind of that connection. So when you're dealing with super old photographs, if you don't know who anyone is, here's your permission slip that you don't have to worry about it and you don't have to scan it or whatever. So I think that making sure that there's some sort of filtering process, like whatever kind of works for you. But for me, it was, do I know who these people are? Trying to get rid of the duplicates, but I did scan pretty much all of the photos from my parents' childhood as well as my own. I was born in 1980. So it went up through, whatever, up to probably college. And then when it comes to more of like the digital photos, one of the most helpful tips that I ever learned about from Miss Freddie, who does photo organizing, is to do the daily delete, where you go in wherever you keep all your photos and you just search for the date. So time of recording, this is March 6th. So I just do March 6th, and it's going to show me all the photos I ever took on March 6th, all the screenshots, all the things. And 10 minutes before bed, I just do a daily delete. And not only that, I can kind of remember like what I did on March 6th, all the different years before. And it's that really like doing one small thing once a day that becomes a ritual. And then you're able to kind of deal with the deluge of all of the digital photos that you have and kind of make that a little bit more manageable. One final thing, I did have some, I guess there were Super 8s. So it's like before VHS, but there were some Super 8s of me coming home from the hospital and when I was really young. And I sent those over to Legacy Box, not an affiliate or partner. And then they were able to digitize those. So there are, of course, some companies that can digitize some of these other things or even do the photos if you don't want to do it yourself. So that's a little about my experience with all things photos.
You know, just the fact that there are multiple companies you and I are bringing up goes to show that this is something so many of us are struggling with, that people have created entire companies to help us manage it all, you know. And it's so funny. You said Miss Freddie. I don't think I'm familiar with her work. And I'm going to pat myself on the back because I thought of this little date searching thing too. I remember I shared on it, I don't know, 2 or so years ago about looking up the date and deleting by date. So go me. I am not a professional photo organizer, but I came up a blind squirrel finds a nut, you know? So thank you for all of that. That's good information. And just for my listeners, I do have an episode way back when, I think it's episode 22, about how to declutter photos on our phones and in our homes, and just kind of my own take and advice of how to go through that, because I know it is super challenging. Listen, this has been such a fantastic conversation. I feel like we were able to cover a lot of really practical challenges that come with decluttering, especially at the end of our lives or near the end of our lives or with the end of our life in mind. It's a very big topic. And so thank you so much for your wisdom. It's phenomenal. And where can people find you and learn more from you and hear more of your wisdom? Because I know you have lots of different platforms.
Yeah, of course. So the best place is probably the podcast. I'm at Mom's Overcoming Overwhelm. And then I'm not on Instagram a ton, but when I am, I'm there at Simple by Emmy. And yeah, I just can't wait to connect with you. I love talking all things Swedish death cleaning and decluttering and all the things. So thanks again for having me.
No, thank you for being here.
Hey Mama, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, could you please share this episode with another mom who is feeling overwhelmed? Also, it would mean the world to me if you could leave a 5-star written review wherever you listen to your podcast. Finally, if you would like more support, come on over to our free Facebook group, tinyurl.com/Moms Overcoming Overwhelm. Can't wait to connect with you soon.